said that the best thing about freelancing is that you get to hop from one place to the next. You don't have to stick with the same style. But the challenge of that is that sometimes you're working with a new editor. And I think for many of us who might not be, as socially adept as a writer, we spend too much time in our rooms all alone. You're always having to sort of adapt and figure out, okay, what do I need to do here? How do I approach this person? What do I ask about? And so I wanted to talk about kind of the challenge of once you've got an assignment, how do you navigate the relationship with your editor? And I have a few tips here. I was asked to deliver some concrete tips. I think number one is don't commit to an open-ended assignment. So the best thing that happens, the most exciting thing, is when an editor comes to you and you say, hey, Brendan, we want you to write 3,000 words about bees. But it's a mistake. I mean, it's very exciting, and you're ready to sign on the dotted line, but you always want to wait before you actually commit. And so one example that I have of this is last year, I had an editor, my editor at the Times, said she was really interested in this field of functional medicine, which is like the alternative medicine meets mainstream medicine, giving people lots and lots of diagnostic tests. And it was starting to become popular in sort of among conservatives as sort of this medical freedom thing. And she was like, why don't you look into that? And I was like, well, I don't know if that's a story there. Can you give me some time? And we ultimately agreed that she would pay me a fee, $500 or so, I think, to actually come back with a concrete pitch. And in the end, I ended up finding one of the leaders in the field, this guy named Mark Hyman, and he's a pretty famous guy, and ended up sort of getting to know him a little bit, and I was like, oh, this guy's pretty interesting. As that was unfolding, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went from being failed presidential candidate to pick for health secretary, and Mark Hyman was actually like a good buddy of RFK, so it suddenly became this sort of timely, relevant story, and I went back and I said, let's do this about Mark Hyman, and in a couple of weeks we had a story. So that was like what I mean by trying to come up with a concrete thing. And the reason is if you don't, you can end up just on a fishing expedition, and you don't want to do that. That's not really great for developing that relationship. So number two is once you've sort of agreed on the terms of the story, you need to keep your editor apprised of like what the expectations are going to be, like what you're going to actually deliver. Well, I'm going to deliver a story about Mark Hyman. I'm going to talk to him on the phone a few times. I've got these documents related to him and his history and so on. But if something changes, you do need to kind of speak up. And so I had another story actually where it was a similar case where I live in LA, and I was asked to write about the fires in LA, so I was asked to write about air pollution, and I was supposed to find a subject to profile. And again, I didn't accept the assignment until I knew what I was actually going to write about. And in the end, I couldn't find a single scientist that I felt was worthy of profiling. So I said, how about if we do it where it's kind of a slice in time, showing a few groups going out and doing research, and my editor approved that. And that was kind of a change of course that we talked about, and I didn't come back and like surprise her with, without having a central character. So I'm going a little bit fast. Oh, so, and then sort of a second thing that often comes up, and that's really important to talk to your editor about, is ethics. When you're out there reporting, different publications, different editors, different journalists have sort of different sort of ethical rules for themselves. Oftentimes, a question that might come up might be, is it okay to interview this person if there's a PR person in the room, if there's a lawyer in the room? How do you disclose that in the story? And those are always good things to have discussions with your editor about. My third tip is don't turn in a story that's too long without talking to your editor about that. So I think when you're working on a short story, the typical rule of thumb you might have heard is say don't go more than 10% or 20% too long. I don't know, Roxanne, do you abide by that rule? That sounds good. But when you start doing longer pieces, when you're turning into 3,000, 4,000 word story, it starts to become a little bit murky about what you leave in and what you take out. And if you're like me, you get really, really excited about your topic and you think every little detail is important and you can't see beyond it. And man, I've screwed up so many times in this way. Because so one of the stories that I wanted to tell you was early on I was writing for Business Week and I was doing a piece about the fishing industry in Massachusetts, and there was like this big fight between these salty fishermen and the fisheries regulators and scientists, and there was even like a small newspaper that was like the local fishermen's newspaper, and I was just like, wow, there's all these characters, it's so cinematic, and I ended up going to my editor with I don't know, I was assigned 3,000 words, I turned in around 7,000, and I was like, man, he's gonna love this, and it was just radio silence. I was like, oh, what happened to Bryant? Hey man, gotten a chance to look at my fishing piece? And it was just like, not yet. And it just went on and on like that. Finally calls me in. And I mean, I turned in like a Harper's story, not that it would have gotten published in Harper's, but a Harper's story for Business Week. I turned in the wrong thing. It was way too long. I didn't warn him about it. And thankfully, he said, hey man, listen, I looked at it. I couldn't make it even through half of it. You need to go away and come back and just turn in a standard 5-part magazine story. Actually, that's the first time I ever heard that term, a 5-part magazine story. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before. Do you know what that is? Basically like 3 narrative sections broken up by 2 expository sections. And it's kind of like what you should fall back on if you get lost and you start turning in a story that's way too long, is just make the simplest possible thing you can. It got published. So don't go long without talking to your editor. And I've told you about all of the ways in which you need to be having a conversation with your editor, but you actually don't need to tell your editor everything. Many times it's better just to keep your mouth shut. So one example of this is when you start to hit some bumps in the road, you might be like, I'm not sure, should I tell them about this little thing that happened? And I don't think that they want to hear from you. Mostly they want to treat you like a professional. You're going to go away, you're going to do your work, and you're going to deliver what you promised, what you'd agreed upon. You're not going to surprise them. You're not going to turn in something that's too long. But every once in a while, you end up in a sticky situation, and you're going to sort of think, should I tell them or not? And I had this happen to me this last year where, I don't know how great of a tip this is, but the last year I was working on this piece about this palm oil plantation in Peru that was run by these American investors who cleared this vast swath of the rainforest. And I've been reading about it for years, and I finally got to go down there and investigate. There were stories of people who lost their who were pushed out of the land, laws being broken, and all of this. And I got completely lost. It was very difficult to report. There was no cell phone communication. I was trying to track down sources up this river or down this dirt road. And there was a lot of misinformation. I learned a lot of the stories I'd read had been pushed forward by environmental activists, indigenous activists, and then there'd been sort of this countervailing narrative that's been spread by the palm oil company, and I felt really confused. And late one night, I was just wrote my editor, and I was like, don't believe everything in my pitch is wrong. And she, it really, really freaked her out. When I got back, she's like, we need to talk. And the first, and I'd actually, I'd kind of moved on. I'd been reporting, I hadn't thought about this message I wrote, and she's like, I don't even know if we have a story here anymore. And I had to spend several hours explaining to her that, yeah, I ran into some roadblocks, but actually we still have a story because this, and this, and can you give me more words? So it worked out in the end, but I think I would not have told her all of my hang-ups, all of my problems. It's best to just kind of keep that to yourself. So then my 5th tip is don't ever turn in that draft before it's ready. That would allow you to, for instance, see that your story's too long and it's really freaking boring and you should cut it in half or whatever. I always have a buffer before I turn in a story, maybe 2 weeks, and I'll finish it, I'll put it in the drawer, and then I come back to it and I'll look at it and give it one more edit before I turn it in. Sometimes I'll share it with a friend, especially if it's a place that, new place to me, a new editor, or it's a prestigious place, I want to be really careful, then I'll share it with a friend and get some feedback on it. But just don't ever rush, and don't wait till the last minute, because I've made mistakes that way, and I advise you not to do the same. So number 6, I've told you about all the ways things can go wrong, and of course the worst possible thing that can happen when you're freelancing, well, not the worst possible, but close to it, is to have your story killed. And that is just, it's a terrible feeling. It's happened to all of us. You wonder, did you do something wrong? And am I a good writer? Should I get out of this business? All these kinds of things. And the fact is, like, everybody has had a killed story. And sometimes it's because the story just didn't work out. You thought it was one thing and it wasn't. Sometimes maybe you didn't pull it off. Maybe you didn't write it very well, and you got to deal with that. But most of the time, it's just, it just needs a little bit more time, can be reworked, and it turns out a killed story is actually an asset. Most of the stories that I've had killed, I've been able to resell. One of the first stories that I sold to a major magazine was about surimi seafood, which is like these Japanese fish cakes. And I sold a piece to Gourmet magazine, which no longer exists. And I went out, I did the story, and then like a day after I turned it in, my editor sent me a note, and she's like, the editor-in-chief doesn't like it, or doesn't want to publish it. And I was like, what? They told me nothing, no notes, nothing. And I was just like, I was shattered. But within a week, I'd resold it to Savoir magazine. And so then Savoir actually, in that case, I'd sent them the entire draft, and they bought it, paid me the full rate. And then I think they like went out of business because they never published it. So I had to ultimately, I had to publish it with this small magazine that some laid-off journalist created. But I actually got paid twice for that one. I've been paid 3 times for another story. And yeah, and in many cases, it gives you a chance to sort of go to a new editor, show them what you've already done, or else you can sort of rewrite a pitch and make an even better pitch than you had before. And yeah, so I think it's great to see every killed story as an opportunity. And then my final tip is that you should write for places and people that treat you with respect. There's a lot of ways that things can go wrong in this business. Sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's theirs, but it's about having a trusting relationship and sticking with the editors that you like. And so that's the last piece of advice. So thank you.